There is no enemy more invisible than the thing you refuse to release. It does not announce itself. It doesn't fight you. It simply waits, inside the grip, while you spend your energy holding the shape of something that has already changed. You feel it as exhaustion, as a weight with no clear source, as the strange tiredness that comes not from doing too much, but from holding on too long. Most people carry this their entire lives without ever naming it. Kenko Yoshida named it at 30 years old, and then he did something that no one around him understood. He was a senior courtier in the Imperial court of Kyoto, poetry that nobles read and passed to each other, access and recognition that educated men spent entire careers chasing. He shaved his head, put on monk's robes, walked out. His colleagues assumed a breakdown. His friends waited for him to return. He never returned. He spent the rest of his life alone, writing in a small hut outside the city. What he produced in those 40 years has been studied for 7 centuries. The subject was one idea, one truth so clear it had made his former life impossible to continue living inside. Everything ends. Not as a warning, not as a tragedy, as the most important fact about existence that most people spend their entire lives refusing to see. He called it Mujo, the Japanese word for impermanence. Nothing stays, not the career, not the relationship, not the version of yourself you have worked so hard to build, not the success, not the comfort, not the person you love most. Everything changes, everything ends. Most people hear this and tighten their grip. Kenko heard it and opened his hands. 6 principles from his life and writings. 6 ways to stop being destroyed by the one thing that cannot be stopped. Subscribe and let's begin. Who was Kenko Yoshida? Before the 6 principles, you need to understand who Kenko was, because his decision is the argument. Kenko was born around 1283 into a family with a tradition of Shinto service. He was educated, gifted with language, and talented enough to secure a position in the Imperial court, one of the most competitive and prestigious environments in Japan. He thrived there for 15 years. He wrote poetry that circulated among nobles. He understood the complex social architecture of court life and navigated it with intelligence and grace. He was also, during those 15 years, watching something that most of his colleagues were too busy succeeding to notice. Everything around him was in constant motion. Alliances shifted. Patrons died. The political landscape that made one man powerful in 1305 could make him irrelevant by 1310. The people he had built relationships with changed, left, or disappeared. The version of himself that the court required changed with each new season of power. Nothing held. He began writing about this, not as complaint, as observation. The cherry blossoms that everyone in the court gathered to admire lasted 4 days. The moon they wrote poetry about was never the same moon 2 nights in a row. The people they relied on were, all of them, temporary. At 30 years old, he understood that he had been living in contradiction, seeing the impermanence clearly and spending every day acting as if it wasn't real. Building security in a place where security was impossible, attaching his sense of self to things that were, by their nature, incapable of holding it. He left, and what he found in the leaving became Tsurezuregusa, one of the great documents of Japanese thought. 6 principles from that document. Principle 1. You are not losing it. You never had it. We cannot live forever in this world. Like foam upon the water, lives appear and disappear. Kenko Yoshida. Kyoto Imperial Court, 1310. Kenko is 27 years old. A senior courtier he has admired for years has died suddenly. The man was powerful, respected, connected to everyone. His death leaves a gap in the court's social fabric that everyone can feel. Within 6 months, the gap has closed. The alliances have redistributed. The conversations that used to happen in that man's rooms now happen in someone else's rooms. The court has absorbed the loss and continued. Kenko watches this and writes in his journal that evening, "We grieve as if the world has lost something permanent, but the world has only revealed what was always true. The man was never a permanent fixture. He was a temporary arrangement, as are we all." This is the first principle, and it is the hardest one to receive. The suffering that comes from losing something, a relationship, a job, a period of life, a version of yourself, is real. That is not the question. The question is what story you tell about the loss. Most people tell this story. I had something, and now it is gone, and I have been diminished by its absence. Kenko observed a different story, one that the court's quick recovery kept confirming. You never had it the way you thought you had it. You had access to it, temporarily. The relationship was always going to change or end. The career was always going to shift. The version of yourself that existed 5 years ago was always going to become someone else. The loss did not take something permanent. It revealed something that was always impermanent. This distinction sounds philosophical. Its practical effect is concrete. When you believe you have lost something permanent, the grief has no natural endpoint. You are mourning a theft, something taken from you that should not have been taken. The injustice of it keeps the wound open. When you understand that what ended was always temporary, the grief has a natural form. You are mourning the ending of something that was always going to end. The loss is real. The tragedy is not. Modern psychology calls this distinction the difference between primary and secondary suffering. Primary suffering is the pain of the loss itself, real, unavoidable, appropriate. Secondary suffering is the additional layer of pain produced by the belief that the loss is wrong, that things should be different, that what ended should not have ended. Secondary suffering is optional. Kenko understood this 700 years before the psychology had a name for it. How it applies to your life. Think of the thing you are currently holding most tightly, the relationship, the position, the way things are right now. Ask one question honestly. Was this always going to be temporary? Not, is it ending now? Was it always temporary? From the beginning, by its nature? The answer is almost always yes. The question is not whether it will change. It is whether you will spend the time it exists bracing against its ending or inhabiting it fully while it lasts. Principle 2. The cherry blossom teaches what the summer tree forgets. If we lived forever, if the dews of Adashino never vanished, if the cremation smoke lingered forever over Toribeyama, how little the world would move us. Outside Kyoto 1320, 7 years after leaving the court. Kenko is watching the cherry blossoms with a small group of monks. The blossoms last 4 days at most. The monks watch in silence. One of them says, "It would be better if they lasted longer." Kenko considers this. "No," he says quietly. "The reason they move us is because they do not last. If they bloomed all year, no one would leave their house to see them." The monk thinks about this. "Then the shortness is the beauty," he says. "The shortness is everything," Kenko says. This is the second principle. Impermanence is not the enemy of value, it is the source of it. This is the insight that Kenko's observation of court life had given him, and that most people spend their lives getting backwards. We behave as if permanence would increase the value of what we love. If this relationship lasted forever, it would be more precious. If this period of success never ended, it would be more worth having. If this moment of happiness could be held, it would mean more. The cherry blossom demonstrates the opposite. Its value is inseparable from its brevity. The reason people travel across Japan to stand under the trees for 4 days is precisely because there are only 4 days. Remove the ending, and you remove the reason to pay attention. What Kenko understood, watching those blossoms decade after decade outside his small hut, is that the things you love are already more precious than you experience them as being, because you are spending your attention on their potential ending rather than on their actual presence. The relationship is here now. The good period is happening now. The version of your life that you will one day look back on with longing is the one you are living at this moment. Mujo does not teach you to be indifferent to what you love. It teaches you to be more fully present to it, because you understand, really understand, that it is temporary. And temporary things, when seen clearly, demand a quality of attention that permanent things never could. How it applies to your life. Identify one thing in your life that you are currently taking for granted because it feels stable and ongoing. A relationship, a person, a period of health, a circumstance. Now look at it as if it had 4 days left. Not to induce anxiety, to restore the quality of attention it deserves. The cherry blossom is only 4 days. Most of us are spending those 4 days planning for when it will be gone. Principle 3. The self you are protecting does not exist. To sit alone in the lamplight with a book spread out before you and hold intimate converse with men of unseen generations, such is a pleasure beyond compare. Outside Kyoto, 1325. Kenko is writing in his hut. He is working on a section of Tsurezuregusa about identity, about the self that people construct and defend and build entire lives around protecting. He writes, "The man of 40 is not the man of 30. The man of 30 is not the man of 20. We call ourselves by one name across all these different people, but which one are we?" He sets down his brush. Outside, the leaves are falling. The same tree he watched bud in spring is now bare. He does not think of it as a diminished tree. He thinks of it as a tree doing what trees do. He picks up the brush again and writes, "We are the same, always changing, always the same name, but different." This is the third principle. The self you spend enormous energy protecting is not a fixed thing that can be protected. It is a process, constantly changing, and the energy spent defending a particular version of it against change is energy spent fighting your own nature. Most people have a specific image of themselves that they treat as the real, essential self. A self that needs to be maintained, protected, and kept consistent. When circumstances threaten this image, whether through failure, aging, loss of status, or simply the passage of time, it feels like an attack on something fundamental. Kenko observed that this image is always a fiction. The self of 10 years ago and the self of today share a name and a body and some memories. They are not the same person in any meaningful sense. The self is not a fixed object. It is a river, always moving, always the same river, never the same water twice. Modern psychology describes this as narrative identity, the story we tell about who we are. Research consistently shows that people who hold their narrative identity flexibly, who can update the story as circumstances change, demonstrate measurably greater psychological resilience than people who hold it rigidly. The rigid identity does not protect you from change. It makes change more painful when it arrives. Kenko's escape from the court was, at one level, the act of a man who had stopped defending a particular version of himself. The courtier identity, the recognition identity, the stability identity. He released them not because they were bad, but because he had understood they were temporary. And defending temporary things against their nature is the definition of suffering. How it applies to your life. Identify the version of yourself you are most afraid to lose. The successful one, the needed one, the young one, the one that people respect in a particular way. Ask honestly, is this who you are, or is this who you were at a particular moment, under particular circumstances? The version of you that exists right now is also temporary. You can spend it defending the last version, or inhabiting this one fully. Kenko walked away from everything that defined him and found something that could not be taken away. If this is giving you a new way to see your own life, subscribe. This is what this channel is for. Principle 4. Loss is the teacher. Comfort cannot be. It is a fine thing when a man who thoroughly understands a subject is unwilling to open his mouth and only speaks when questioned. Outside Kyoto, 1330. A young monk visits Kenko's hut. The young monk has recently lost something significant, a teacher he loved, who died without warning. He is in grief, and under the grief is something else, a kind of anger, the sense that the loss is wrong, that the world has taken something it had no right to take. He tells Kenko this. Kenko listens without interrupting. Then he says, "What did your teacher give you before he died?" The young monk lists things, teachings, conversations, corrections, examples. Kenko nods. Could he have given you those things as clearly if you had known he would always be available? The young monk is quiet for a long time. "No," he finally says. "I think I would have assumed there was more time." "Yes," Kenko says. "The loss teaches you what the comfort could not. It shows you what you actually had. That is not cruelty. That is instruction." This is the fourth principle. Loss is not only subtraction. It is also, when received correctly, a form of education that no comfortable circumstance can provide. Most people experience loss as purely negative. Something has been removed, and the removal has left damage. The task is to repair the damage and return to the state before the loss. Kenko observed something more complex. That loss, by revealing what was valuable, teaches you things about your own priorities, your own depth of care, your own capacity for attention, that no period of easy abundance ever could. The young monk had been with his teacher for years. He had not understood the full weight of those teachings until they stopped coming. The loss did not create the value. It revealed it, made it visible in a way that presence had kept invisible. This is not a reason to welcome loss or to perform gratitude for suffering. It is an observation about what loss contains, if you receive it as information rather than only as damage. Modern psychology's research on post-traumatic growth confirms this precisely. Approximately half of people who experience significant loss or trauma report not just recovery but genuine growth, expanded perspective, deeper relationships, clarified priorities, that they attribute directly to the experience of loss itself, not despite it, because of it. Kenko understood this not from research, but from watching the court absorb loss after loss and occasionally produce, from that absorption, a quality of wisdom that easy success never generated. How it applies to your life. Think of a significant loss you have experienced, not to reopen it, to ask one question: what did it show you about what mattered that you had not fully seen before? The answer to that question is the instruction the loss was carrying. Most people take the damage and leave the instruction. Kenko's principle is to take both. Principle 5. The moment you are in is the only moment that exists. It is a strange thing how precious the moment becomes when one knows it will not return. Outside Kyoto, 1335, late autumn. Kenko is old now. His hair is fully white. He sits outside his hut in the last warm afternoon of the year, knowing that winter is days away. A visitor finds him there and asks what he is doing. Sitting in the last warm afternoon, Kenko says. Are you not cold? Not yet, Kenko says. And when I am, it will be winter. But right now, it is not winter. The visitor sits beside him. They sit in silence for a long time. Later, the visitor writes in his own journal, I have never felt an afternoon so completely. Because he was completely in it, I had no choice but to follow. This is the 5th principle. The present moment is not a consolation prize for people who cannot have the past or the future. It is the only place where life actually happens. Most people's attention is divided, chronically and almost automatically, between memory and anticipation, between what was and what might be. The present moment is inhabited partially, briefly, and often only when something forces attention there: crisis, beauty, pain, or the sudden recognition of loss. Kenko's decades of living with Mujo had produced something that looked, to visitors, like a kind of peace, but was actually something more specific, a complete habituation to the present. Not because he had suppressed memory or eliminated planning, because he had understood, deeply and practically, that the only moment where anything could be experienced, felt, or done was this one. The past is a memory. The future is a projection. The present is the only real address where your life is actually occurring. This is why the Mujo principle is not pessimistic. It is radically practical. If everything is temporary, and the present is the only moment that exists, then the present is not less valuable. It is infinitely valuable. It is all there is. Modern research on mindfulness and present moment awareness consistently shows that the degree to which a person is mentally present during their own life is one of the strongest predictors of reported well-being. More than income, more than relationship status, more than achievement, the quality of attention you bring to what is actually happening right now matters more than almost any external circumstance. Kenko lived this not as a meditation technique, but as the natural consequence of understanding Mujo clearly. When you know that this afternoon is the only afternoon of this kind you will ever have, you stop spending it somewhere else. How it applies to your life. For 1 hour today, practice what Kenko was doing in that last warm afternoon. Not meditation, not mindfulness as a technique. Simply stay where you are. When your attention moves to what happened or what might happen, return it to what is actually happening, not forcefully. The way you gently redirect a child who's wandered off the path. The hour will feel different from other hours. That difference is what Kenko spent 40 years building into a permanent state. Principle 6. Open hands hold more than closed fists. To know the way broadly is to know it in everything. Outside Kyoto, 1340, near the end of Kenko's life, a student asks him, "Sensei, you gave up so much when you left the court. Do you regret any of it?" Kenko thinks about this for a long time. "When I held my position tightly," he says, "I could feel only the position. Everything else was background." He picks up a stone from the path beside him, holds it in a closed fist. When you grip something completely, your hand can feel only the thing you are gripping. He opens his hand. The stone sits in his open palm. He picks up a leaf with the same hand, then a small flower that has fallen from a nearby tree. "When I stopped gripping," he says, "I could feel everything." He looks at the three things in his open hand. "I did not lose the court. I stopped gripping it. And when I stopped gripping it, I found I had room for everything else." This is the sixth principle, and it is where all the others converge. The open hand holds more than the closed fist. This is not a metaphor about generosity. It is a precise description of what happens psychologically when you release attachment to specific outcomes, specific versions of yourself, specific arrangements of your life that you have decided must continue unchanged. The person who grips tightly is not more secure. They are less capable of receiving what is actually available. Their attention is consumed by the defense of what they already have. They cannot fully experience the present because they are occupied with protecting it from change. Kenko's 40 years after leaving the court produced Tsurezuregusa, a document read for 7 centuries. Essays written in a small hut by a man with no position, no salary, and no social standing in the world he had left. What he had was attention, the kind of attention that only becomes available when you stop spending it on the protection of arrangements that cannot be protected. Modern psychology describes this as the paradox of control. People who maintain a strong need for control over outcomes report lower well-being and higher anxiety than people who invest in the process while releasing the outcome. The tighter the grip, the more exhausted the gripper. The more open the hand, the more capable of actually engaging with what is real. Kenko did not open his hand because he stopped caring. He opened it because he had understood, finally and completely, that the closed fist was not keeping anything. The impermanence was happening anyway. His grip was not protecting him from Mujo. It was just making him unable to experience anything else while Mujo took its course. How it applies to your life. Identify one thing you are currently gripping, not to release it immediately, just to feel the grip. Notice the tension it requires. Notice what attention it is consuming. Notice what you might be able to feel if that hand were open. You do not have to open it today, but knowing you are gripping is the beginning of having a choice about whether to continue. What this means for you. Mujo is not a philosophy for people who have given up. It is a philosophy for people who are exhausted from holding on to things that cannot be held, and who suspect, somewhere underneath the exhaustion, that there might be another way to live. Kenko's 6 principles are not instructions to stop caring about what you love. They are instructions to care differently, more fully, more presently, without the layer of suffering that comes from treating temporary things as if they were permanent, and then experiencing their impermanence as a personal injury. Here is what living these 6 principles looks like. You stop treating the end of things as theft. The relationship changed. The period of success ended. The version of yourself from 5 years ago became someone else. None of this was taken from you. All of it was always temporary. The grief is real. The tragedy is not. You start experiencing what you have as more valuable, not less, because you see it clearly as temporary. The conversation you are having right now, the person sitting across from you, the circumstance of your life today, which will be different in ways you cannot predict within a year. You pay the attention that temporary things deserve. You stop defending a fixed version of yourself against the changes that are already happening. You let the river move. You remain the river. You stop spending energy being a dam. You receive what losses teach you, not just what they take. Every significant loss is carrying instruction. Most people take the damage and leave the instruction on the ground. You pick it up. You inhabit the moment you are in with the quality of attention it deserves, not as a technique, as the natural consequence of understanding that this moment is the only address where your life is actually occurring. And you open your hands, not to lose what you love, to be able to feel it fully, to have room for what is actually available in this moment, which is always more than a closed fist can hold. Kenko Yoshida died around 1352, 40 years after leaving the Imperial court. He left behind Tsurezuregusa, 143 essays written in a small hut by a man who had given up everything that the world around him said was worth having. 7 centuries later, those essays are still read, still studied, still capable of changing how a person sees the morning they wake up into. Not because Kenko was extraordinary, because he was willing to see clearly what most people spend their entire lives looking away from. Everything ends. Nothing holds. The arrangement of your life right now is temporary. The people in it are temporary. The version of you that exists today is temporary. And this, seen clearly, is not a reason for despair. It is the most important fact about existence that you have access to, because it changes everything about how you inhabit the time you have. The cherry blossoms last 4 days. That is why people travel across Japan to stand under the trees. Your life is the cherry blossoms. The question is whether you will spend the 4 days gripping the branch or standing underneath it with your face turned up. Kenko chose to stand underneath. Everything he produced came from that choice. Comment below. Open hands hold more. Subscribe to Presence and Purpose for ancient wisdom, tested by time and confirmed by science. New video every week. Kenko walked away from everything and found that open hands hold more than closed fists ever could. The question is, what you are still gripping.